working to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Hello and welcome to ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. Joining me today is from our EBC Maldives Bureau. Hello, Steffi.
Hi, Alma, and I'm Steffi De Juan, bringing you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines, Indonesia's COVID cases topped the 1 million mark as the archipelago launches one of the world's biggest vaccine drives to clamp down on a soaring infection rate.
Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. on Tuesday said the Department of Foreign Affairs, DFA, will repatriate all distressed Filipinos currently seeking shelter at the Philippine Embassy in Syria, some of whom were reportedly trafficking and sexually abused before they were brought to the embassy.
As part of a move to commercialize autonomous vehicles, 2 driverless buses were deployed on January 25, flying 2 routes in Singapore.
Singapore Zoo releases video of its lion cub Simba, who was born in October 2020 after being conceived by artificial insemination in January 2020 in a first for the city-state.
First, Indonesia's COVID cases topped the 1 million mark as the archipelago launched one of the world's biggest vaccine drives to clamp down on a soaring infection rate. The Southeast Asean nation, or Asian nation, of nearly 270 million, has recorded 1,012,350 virus cases and almost 29,000 deaths, according to official data. But low testing rates mean the crisis is believed to be much more severe than those figures suggest. Some hospitals are on the brink of collapse as they are overwhelmed with patients in one of Asia's worst-hit nations, according to health experts. There are reports of patients being unable to access intensive care units and isolation rooms due to high demand, a shortage underscored by an East Java city's move to outfit a train carriage to accommodate the sick. The virus has killed more than 600 doctors, nurses, and other medical workers, many outfitted with limited protection equipment, according to independent researchers. The country of some 17,000 islands is now rolling out a huge vaccination drive with frontline workers and other high-risk groups among the first to get the jab, produced by China's Sinovac. Officials had earlier said they would focus on inoculating the 18 to 59-year-old working population instead of prioritizing the elderly like many countries are doing. But the health ministry later said some 25 million seniors would be targeted after doctors and other frontline workers if testing shows the Sinovac jab is safe for older people.
President spokesperson Secretary Harry Roque confirmed that President Rodrigo Roa Duterte has allowed limited face-to-face classes in medical schools and medical allied programs in higher education institutions, which hospitals accepting COVID-19 patients in areas under MGCQ and GCQ.
Well, ito po ay para sa medical and allied programs. Ito po ay sa mga med schools and yung mga medical allied programs sa mga higher educational institutions sa MGCQ at para po sa mga higher educational institutes o institutions in GCQ areas with base hospitals that cater to COVID-19 patients. Ito po ay para hindi tayo maubusan ng mga doktor, no? Kung hindi po magpapatuloy yung mga face-to-face ng mga doktor and allied medical profession. Nauna po nito, pinayagan po ng IATF na mag-resume yung face-to-face clinical internship program ng UP-PGH, no? At ito po, ang memo po ni Executive Secretary came after the IATF resolution po na pinapayagan na nga yung UPPGH internship program. Well, sa tingin ko po, number one, you cannot second guess the president. Pero number two, obvious po ang dahilan kung bakit kinakailangan magpatuloy ang training ng mga doctors dahil pag hindi natin pinagpatuloy yan, may darating pong panahon, wala tayong magiging graduates. And at the time of pandemic, we need all the doctors we can have.
Meanwhile, China will donate 1 million doses of its Sinovac coronavirus vaccine to Cambodia. The kingdom's strongman premier, Hun Sen, has said, thanking friend Beijing for its generosity. Cambodia has long been a staunch ally of Beijing, receiving billions of dollars in soft loans and investment from China. While many countries reacted early in the pandemic by closing its borders to Chinese travelers, the premier Hun Sen refused and even traveled to Beijing to meet with the leader, Xi Jinping, in a show of solidarity. The premier announced late Friday that China has offered to donate shots made by the firm Sinovac. The first people to get the jab would include frontline health workers, teachers, soldiers, the premier's bodyguards, and officials around the king, he said. Sinovac's CoronaVac has rolled out in Turkey on Friday after tests there showed it to be 91.25% effective. But more robust trials in Brazil demonstrated an efficacy rate of around 50%, much lower than those of rival shots from Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Oxford AstraZeneca. A third trial in Indonesia, where authorities this week kicked off a mass vaccination drive with CoronaVac shots, showed an efficacy of 65.3%. Cambodia has appeared to do well in the pandemic so far, registering just 436 cases, though experts say the low numbers are likely due to a lack of testing. The Philippines has included Czech Republic on the coverage of the temporary travel ban on foreign travelers due to the new COVID-19 variant, according to Malacanang. In a statement, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said foreign passengers arriving directly from Czech Republic, as well as those who have been there within 14 days immediately preceding arrival in the Philippines, will be restricted from entering the country starting January 28 until the 31st. Foreign passengers coming from or who have been to the Czech Republic within 14 days immediately preceding arrival in the Philippines, arriving before January 28, 12:01 a.m. Manila time, will be allowed to enter the Philippines. Filipino citizens coming from or who have been to the Czech Republic will be allowed to enter the Philippines, but they need to undergo quarantine until the result of a subsequent RT-PCR test, which is administered on the 5th day of the quarantine, is released. Now, those who tested negative from both RT-PCR tests will be endorsed to their respective local government units, which will strictly monitor the remainder of their 2-week quarantine. Currently, foreign travelers from the United Kingdom, Denmark, Ireland, Japan, Australia, Israel, the Netherlands, China, Hong Kong, Switzerland, France, Germany, Iceland, Italy, Lebanon, Singapore, Sweden, South Korea, South Africa, Canada, Spain, the United States, Portugal, India, Finland, Norway, Jordan, Brazil, Austria, Pakistan, Jamaica, Luxembourg, and Oman are prohibited from going to the Philippines.
The Madiun City Administration in Indonesia's Java Island has prepared 3 trains consisting of 24 wagons for emergency COVID-19 treatment facility. The trains are located at Inca, a state-owned train maker. As many as 18 wagons are earmarked for patient treatment, while the remaining 6 are for medical workers. The maximum capacity is 252 patients and 72 medical workers. Medical equipment for COVID-19 treatment has been installed, including cold storage for medicines and ventilators. Indonesia's COVID-19 cases have topped the 1 million mark on Tuesday as the archipelago launched launches one of the world's biggest vaccine drives to clamp down on a soaring infection rate. The Southeast Asian nation of nearly 270 million has recorded 1,012,350 virus cases and almost 29,000 deaths, according to official data. But low testing rates mean the crisis is believed to be much more severe than those figures suggest. Some hospitals are on the brink of collapse as they are overwhelmed with patients in one of the Asia's worst hit nations, health experts warn. An on-demand autonomous bus developed by ST Engineering starts the trial run from Singapore Science Park to Hub Park William MRTM station in Singapore. The development is part of the 3-month trial by the Alliance for Actions on Robotics, which was convened by the Emerging Stronger Task Force to promote and accelerate sustainable deployment of robotics in Singapore. The buses developed by ST Engineering started operating on January 25th. Commuters will have to pay for the bus service and can book the bus on demand via specific apps. This will mark the first time autonomous buses are operating commercially in Singapore. Mothership SOTSG reports that the bus at Singapore Science Park is 7 meters long and seat up to 10 passengers and will operate from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays.
In other news, the Philippine government, through the Department of Foreign Affairs, or DFA, has pledged some $100,000, approximately 4.8 million pesos, to the Asean's COVID-19 Response Fund. Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said the contribution is on top of Manila's $100,000 pledge to the COVID-19 vaccine Global Access Facility, or COVAX. Locsin said the fund will be sourced from the DFA's own travel funds. In addition to my $100,000 pledge to the COVAX facility, he said, I pledge another $100,000 to the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund from DFA travel funds. He said, I wish to express my gratitude to Budget Secretary Wendell Abisado for realigning DFA funds for this and the depleted passport revolving fund, he wrote in a tweet. The ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund is a special fund established in April last year to bolster the bloc's pandemic response and help finance the procurement of necessary medical supplies and the development of vaccines. The Philippines' contribution was first announced by the top diplomat during the virtual ASEAN Foreign Affairs meeting or retreat on January 21. And during the said meeting, Locsin also echoed President Duterte's call at the last ASEAN summit to take the challenges of 2020 in stride and strive to build back better, healthier, and more prosperous societies through deeper engagements on vital issues uniting ASEAN. He then urged the bloc to maintain the momentum of our engagements in 2020 into this year, 2021, particularly in our efforts to respond to the challenges of COVID-19. ASEAN and I will, Steffi and I will be back here on ASEAN in Focus right after this short break.
Events happen around us all the time, in our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced, eagle news, because we live in interesting times.
It says the best defense is still containment.
We are in uncharted territory.
Final volume 450. FI on to 100%. Traffic ban. Positioning.
Innovation, digital disruption, globalization. Startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations, all face interesting challenges in the market today. Peek into the world of exciting opportunities and partnerships to drive growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business every Saturday from 5 to 6 p.m. Open for Business, from vision to action.
It's really PM is the key dahil tuwing 8 p.m. Monday to Friday, iaait na ang kantahan at kainang rolled into one. Abangan sina JC Parker at Marcelito Pomoy because it's time to sing, it's time to eat sa It's Sing Time! Dito lang yan sa Net 25.
It's Sing Time!
Welcome back. Here in the Philippines, Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said the Department of Foreign Affairs will repatriate all distressed Filipinos currently seeking shelter at the Philippine Embassy in Syria, some of whom were reportedly trafficked and sexually abused, but before they were brought to the embassy. He said, I am emptying the shelters of all wards no later than next flight out, sending a team to do it. It won't happen again. Good-intentioned NGOs or non-government organizations complain about violations of privacy and risk of naming victims. But for me, the Washington Post got the job done, he said in a tweet. The commitment was made following a January 25 Washington Post report titled Sold into Syrian Servitude, Filipino Workers Tell of Abuse, Rape, and Imprisonment, which detailed the experiences of some Filipinos who were promised a job in the United Arab Emirates, but instead they were trafficked to Syria to work as domestic helpers. The news report said some of the victims were sold between $8,000 and $10,000 US, and these Filipino workers were at times subjected to physical and sexual attacks by their employers and denied the salaries they were promised. It also noted the case of a 15-year-old child who was said to be 12 years old when she was trafficked to Syria. The kid is reportedly living at the Philippine Embassy in Syria for the past 20 months, where some of the embassy staff allegedly even asked her if she would like to go back to work instead. In a separate statement dated January 25, the Philippine Embassy in Syria said it takes the allegations written in the report, quote, seriously. It said, quote, certain personnel have been administratively investigated and a human rights lawyer has been deployed to further look into the allegations of poor treatment of Filipino victims while under temporary shelter to recommend other necessary actions to be taken, unquote. The DFA has yet to provide details as to when they target the next repatriation flight for these Filipinos, but the embassy said talks are ongoing with the employers to secure their exit visas. It has also been working to obtain various clearances required by the Syrian government, such as payment for visa fees, residence visa penalty fees, social security clearances fees, and court fees. Malaysia's opposition leader has launched legal action against the Prime Minister over the suspension of Parliament during a state of emergency aimed at fighting the coronavirus. According to his lawyer on Tuesday, the king declared a national emergency earlier this month for the first time in half a century, following a request from Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin as virus cases spiraled out of control. The declaration has allowed Muhyiddin to suspend Parliament at a time his government was on the brink of collapse, sparking accusations that he was using it to cling to power. Anwar Ibrahim, shown here in the picture, a veteran politician who heads the Pact of Hope Opposition Alliance, filed a lawsuit at the Kuala Lumpur High Court on Monday, according to lawyer Ramkaral Singh. Anwar is seeking a judicial review of this advice and urging the court to rule it unlawful and unconstitutional, according to the lawyer Ramkaral. The state of emergency itself is not being challenged, he added. Muhyiddin seized power in March last year without an election after a reformist administration, of which Anwar was a leading member, collapsed amid bitter infighting. But Muhyiddin's government is also highly unstable. Anwar, who spent years in jail on sodomy charges critics said were politically motivated, was a leading member of the last government and seen by many as a prime minister in waiting. Supporters say the state of emergency is needed to channel extra resources to fighting COVID-19 and to lessen the chances of national polls, which they fear could worsen the outbreak. Malaysia has recorded over 190,000 infections and almost 700 deaths, and strict curbs are in place across the country. Meanwhile, the Philippine Navy is expecting the arrival of its second brand-new frigate next month to complete the acquisition of a pair of newly built warships from South Korea under the second phase of its capability upgrade program. Navy Chief Vice Admiral Giovanni Carlo Bacordo said the BRP Antonio Luna, or FF-151, which was built by South Korean Hyundai Heavy Industries, or HHI, should drop anchor in Philippine waters by the third week of February, thus giving the Navy its second brand-new missile-capable warship. The Del Pilar sister ship, BRP Jose Rizal, was already delivered by HHI and was christened into the service by the Navy with its baptism of fire in the form of a naval exercise courtesy of the world's biggest and largest naval war games, the Rim of the Pacific, or the RIMPAC, which was held in Hawaii last year. The delivery of the Jose Rizal, which is fully capable of fighting in all spheres of asymmetric warfare, saw the dawning of the missile age for the Navy. Meanwhile, a statement from the Navy also said its frigate technical inspection team began on Tuesday its final inspection of Antonio Luna in Ulsan, South Korea. The Navy said that the final inspection will be carried out until January 30.
Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III has urged lawmakers to remove restrictive economic provisions in the Constitution to help in the recovery of the domestic economy, partly by opening it to foreign investors. In his remarks during the meeting of the House of Representatives Committee on Constitutional Amendments, On Tuesday, Dominguez declined to give his side on the proposed changes in the Constitution, but highlighted the need to act on something that is doable and immediately achievable.
The academic, removing the restrictive economic provisions and the joint foreign chambers constitution would be a significant factor in revving up the Philippine economy and sustaining its recovery. The means for amending the Constitution, however, is a political question, and I would not dare advise our legislators on the matter. Nonetheless, I ask our legislators to act on something that is doable. What is most important is to undertake what is immediately achievable. It is preferable, of course, to achieve the liberalization reforms in one blow. But if there are things that we can do to open up the economy through administrative measures, we must implement them. If there are areas that we can liberalize by amending our existing laws, then let's do that.
The Philippines is perceived by international community as the most restrictive among the Asean countries based on the latest Foreign Direct Investment Regulatory Restrictiveness Index by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. These findings, he said, can be traced to the restrictive policies that need to be changed to entice more foreign investors to place their funds in the country and make it more competitive. Dominguez said the country should have the flexibility to be able to adjust and maximize economic opportunities as and whenever necessary. Vietnam's Ministry for Planning and Industry, supported by the Asean, Australian, New Zealand Free Trade Area Economic Cooperation Support Program, and the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade held a workshop on the development of a handbook for implementing international investment comments, and one-day workshop took place on 15 January. The workshop brought together 55 relevant officials from central and local governments across Vietnam to discuss the effective management of investment treaty commitments to improve investors' confidence, avoid investor-state disputes, and facilitate new investment. Participants also deliberated on how to present and address these issues on a form of a handbook. The handbook, set to be completed in 2021, will contribute to improving the on-the-ground implementation on Vietnam and awareness of the country's international investment commitments, including those under the AANZ-FTA or ASEAN, Australian, New Zealand Free Trade Area. FWS 4THE workshop included presentations by the lead author of the Vietnam's handbook, Professors Jansen Kalamita of the Center for International Law of the National University of Singapore, and Vietnamese legal expert Dean An Cuyet of IDVN Lawyers in Hanoi.
ASEAN in Focus will be right back. Stay tuned.
Tissue boxes mo. Hindi mo ba alam, mauubos daw ang mga tissue products?
Bakit naman?
Ang raw materials daw ng mask at tissue products ay iisa lang. Saan naman galing ang balitang yan? Ay basta, narinig ko lang din. Maraming din kayang nagpo-post sa Facebook at Twitter, kaya kung ako sa'yo, pumuha ka na din. Sige na't mauna na ako sa'yo
Huwag basta-basta magpaniwala
sa mga nakikita
o nababasa sa social media.
Magsaliksik at i-verify ang lahat ng impormasyon
Nakukuha sa internet.
Tandaan,
Maging responsable tayo
sa paggamit ng social media
nang hindi magdulot ng panic sa iba.
kung paanong dapat labanan ng COVID-19.
Ay gayon din ang ating pagsugpo.
sa black propaganda
At maling impormasyon.
Dennis Lu,
Lou Omelda,
General Partosa,
Tyranel Pililu.
Hannibal Arevalo,
EBC,
Japan,
Euro,
we live in interesting times.
Welcome back. The International Monetary Fund slashed its growth projection of the Philippine economy for 2020 and 2021 as the country performed worse than earlier expected in the third quarter of last year. In an email response to reporters, IMF President Representative to the Philippines, Yongsheng Chang or Yongsheng Yang said that the IMF now forecasts a real gross domestic product or GDP contraction of 9.6% for the Philippines in 2020. This is a downward revision from their earlier forecast of negative 8.3% in October. Yang also said they revised the real GDP growth forecast of the Philippines for 2021 at 6.6%. This is also lower than the earlier projection of 7.4%. Earlier this month, Moody's Analytics said the Philippines will be the last country in the Asia-Pacific to regain its economic performance to pre-COVID levels as the country still grapples to make a concrete plan on vaccine procurement and fiscal stimulus remains relatively minute. The Philippine Statistics Authority is expected to release the Philippines' full-year GDP on Thursday.
Presidential spokesperson Secretary Harry Roque said that according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the country's foreign direct investment rose 29% to $6.4 billion in 2020 from $5 billion in 2019, despite falling global FDI.
Ito pa pong magandang balita, ayon sa preliminary estimates ng United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, foreign direct investments to the Philippines rose by almost a third in 2020 bagamat may umiiral na pandemya. In its latest investment trends monitor, UNCTAD said that the trend foreign direct investment flows went up 29% to $6.4 billion in 2020 from $5 billion in 2019.
In his remarks during the meeting of the House of Representatives Committee on Constitutional Amendments on Tuesday, John Forbes, Senior Advisor, American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines Incorporated, Joint Foreign Chambers of the Philippines said that the Philippines can equal Vietnam in foreign direct investment inflow.
Increasing again. So within that context, the Philippines should not expect as much as it was getting in the last 4 years. But let's look at Asia and how much it has been receiving in the next slide. Over the last 20 years, ASEAN, Southeast Asia, actually got to a point of receiving more FDI than China. and China has over 2 times the population of Southeast Asia. So we start in 2001 at 22 billion for Southeast Asia and 47 billion for China. And in 2019, the number for ASEAN, the blue line on the right top, exceeded China. Now, in the last, as a consequence of the pandemic, where China emerged from it sooner than ASEAN, FDI actually increased in 2020 into China and decreased by 31%. But post-pandemic, we hope that these numbers will go back to equivalence or a slight advantage going into ASEAN. The point is, an awful lot of FDI has been coming into ASEAN for the last 2 decades, from 22 billion to over 100 billion a year. Now let's look at where it's going in the 6 largest economies of ASEAN. A minute. Singapore has been at the top, and the figure was over 80 billion, about $85 billion in 2019, and it's had a lot of money. There's a lot of financial investment into Singapore that has left, so the amount last year was 58, and the other 5 largest ASEAN economies are much smaller. But let's look at those other 5 ASEAN economies in the next slide. And here we find the Philippines. This is beginning in 2009, so it's over slightly more than a decade, when the Philippines was at 2 billion a year. And you see ups and downs, but what's important is to focus on where we are now, and we have done much better to get to 6 point. These are UNCTAD figures. They are different somewhat from BSP numbers. But 6.4 billion last year, of course, is 3 times what it was at the beginning of the decade, and is now higher than Malaysia and higher than Thailand. So we want to posit, propose, speculate, estimate that the Philippines can equal Vietnam. The Philippines has a larger population and an excellent location. FDI was 14 billion last year in Vietnam. Philippines a much lower figure, but we think that with reforms, including the important one before the committee, it could eventually be the same as Vietnam.
The International Labour Organization, or ILO, said the pandemic took a massive toll on the global labor market last year, with the equivalent of more than 250 million job loss. It stressed the need for more support to poorer countries with fewer resources to promote employment recovery.
And above all, this edition of the Monitor confirms the massive impact of COVID-19 on labour markets in 2020. This has been the most severe crisis for the world of work since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Its impact is far greater than that of the global financial crisis of 2009. When comparing with the last quarter of 2019, we now see that 8.8% of global working hours were lost in the course of the year. And that is the equivalent of 255 million full-time jobs. As a consequence of all of this, there have been massive losses in global labour market income, equivalent, and this is before income support, equivalent to 3.7 trillion US dollars. And that means 4.4% of global gross domestic product, an extraordinary figure. What we try to do this time is to look back at the year that's just finished, 2020, and really measure the damage, if I can put it like that. And the damage is very severe. A loss of working hours of 8.8% of total, 255 million jobs, full-time equivalents lost. Big hit, almost as big as 8.3% this time, to labour income. So the damage is enormous, unevenly distributed between regions and between different sectors of the workforce, and generally the most vulnerable, the hardest hit. And then we're looking forward to 2021 and the perspectives for recovery. I think we've all started this new year in the hope, maybe expectation, that things are going to get better. We lay out 3 scenarios of recovery for 2021, baseline, optimistic, pessimistic. Perhaps the bad news in all of this is, even on the most optimistic assumptions, we're not going to get back to the starting point. We're not going to recover all of the jobs and working time that has been lost. And the point we try to make in all of this is how well we do depends very much on the policies that we adopt. Obviously, the trajectory going forward of the pandemic matters enormously, but we do need to put in place policies for a human-centered recovery. We need to keep macroeconomic policies very expansionary. We need to target those who are most in need of assistance, look at the sectors of the workforce that have been hardest hit. We need to keep, or actually to improve, international solidarity, so those countries with the least means to invest in recovery get the support that they need, and you would expect this in the ILO, we place a very high value on social dialogue, the cooperation of governments with trade unions and employers' organizations to get the right answers, to get the right policies, and ones that have broad acceptance around the world of work.
Indonesia has lured investments of about $10 billion for its first sovereign wealth fund expected to launch later this year. According to a minister on Tuesday, the commitments include an informal letter of interest for up to $2 billion from the Caisse des Dépôts et Placements du Québec, a Canadian pension fund, and as much as $1.5 billion from Dutch pension fund APG. Indonesia's Economic Affairs Minister Erlangga Hartarto said in a presentation. Since the middle of last year, the government has met with more than 50 global investors. Hartarto told an online business forum, with Indonesia targeting some $20 billion in commitments. Officials are reportedly now considering candidates to head the fund. Indonesia's leader Joko Widodo has said he will focus his second term on attracting more foreign investment to Southeast Asia's biggest economy and sustaining a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure drive. One of the infrastructure projects involves moving the capital from overcrowded Jakarta to a new city on Borneo Island.
The Department of Trade and Industry, or DTI, on Tuesday said a proposal to remove the economic restrictions in the 1987 Constitution would help unleash the economic potential of the Philippines, the second fastest growing economy in Southeast Asia. During the hearing of the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Trade Secretary Ramon Lopez said the department welcomes efforts to remove economic restrictions and any barriers that limit foreign participations in investments and economic activities, either through a charter change or the enactment of laws.
The Department of Trade and Industry has always been in favor of reasonably opening up the economy and liberalizing as many restrictions that hinder the continuous and fast growth of the economy. While our economy has been recognized as the second fastest growing economy in Southeast Asia until the year 2019, right before the pandemic struck, with average growth of over 6% for 14 consecutive quarters, we also know that such growth rates could have even been much higher if we were able to remove basic restrictions as to foreign ownership of businesses in certain sectors stipulated in the Constitution. We therefore welcome the efforts, whether through a charter change or the enactment of laws, in removing these economic restrictions and any barrier that limit foreign participation in investments and economic activities. Eliminating these barriers will certainly unleash the high growth potential of the Philippines, as it will facilitate the entry of more investments that will modernize our sectors, bringing in technology and new capital flows, foreign exchange, improved cost efficiencies, and generate jobs. There are also productivity gains that could arise from the diffusion of knowledge and technology from foreign investors to domestic companies and workers. FDI also...
Singapore Zoo releases video of its lion cub Simba, who was born in October 2020 after being conceived by artificial insemination in January 2020 in a first for the city-state. The male cub, named after the main character in Disney, The Lion King, was conceived with semen extracted from an elderly African lion using electric pulses.
Baby Simba is huge. Thank you, Steffi, for joining me today. Thank you very much for helping me out.
Thank you so much, Alma. And that's the latest news in the ASEAN region. Thank you for joining us today here in ASEAN in Focus. This is Steffi Di Juan, your EBC Maldives Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
Thank you, Steph. And I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.